Come on! Almost! Finally! Yeah!
Triumph is ours!
Kuros!
What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock NBA, and today we're here to talk about my second love, which is video games. Specifically, the video game soundtracks that shaped the punk, hardcore, metal scene, or whatever over the past like 10, 15, even 20 years. Tony Hawk, Guitar Hero, Rock Band, Madden, Call of Duty, all the MLB The Show, NCAA Football, like the list goes on and on and on. First, I'm going to talk about some of the best games and most important soundtracks. Second, I'm going to talk about exactly how these things come together. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about the impact that they made on the scene and why video game soundtracks are such an incredibly important way of introducing new bands and new genres. But first, I want to thank Current for sponsoring this video. Current is a new mobile bank that's trying to shake things up and change a lot of the stuff that honestly kind of sucks about banking. The main thing that I like about these guys is their commitment to transparency. They have no hidden fees, no BS, and as one kind of proof point of that, when their VP of marketing reached out to me about this, I interrogated him with a bunch of probably really annoying questions about all the details of exactly how everything works to make sure there are really no hidden fees, and he gave me super clear, specific answers to my questions right away. Anyway, with Current, there is no minimum balance, there's no overdraft, and if you get the premium account, which is $5 a month, you can also get perks like 0 holds at the gas station and a sweet black card that's gonna make everybody think you're rich. If you want to try out Current, here's what you do. Go to the link in the description of this video, download Current, and set up an account. You can choose from the free or the premium account. It takes like 2 minutes to set up, and then you're ready to rock. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Part 1, the game that set the standard. When it comes to games that made an impact in the world of rock, metal, punk, and all that, I think the first name you have to mention is the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series. Now, it wasn't the first game ever to have licensed music. I think Road Rash is probably the first game I remember to have licensed music, but I do think that Tony Hawk was the one that set the bar for every game that followed. These soundtracks were so good that they really became something more than just the soundtrack. They were a core part of the game in the same way as the collectible VHS tapes or the plane and the warehouse level, in the same way as all those things were a part of the game. I think it worked so well for those games because it made them feel like interactive skate videos. If I'm being honest, oftentimes I actually cared more about the songs than I did the parts themselves, which is probably why I didn't last long in skateboarding. And that's actually how I discovered a lot of my favorite bands like the Descendants, for example. And so because of that dynamic, licensed music from real bands was a perfect fit for the Tony Hawk games. And I could do a whole video just going into detail about every one of these soundtracks, but here's just a handful of the bands that appeared on those soundtracks at one point or another in the series history. Dead Kennedys, Suicidal Tendencies, The Vandals, Goldfinger, Primus, Rage Against the Machine, Millencolin, Lagwagon, AFI, Adolescence, Agent Orange, JFA. It goes on and on. That's just a tiny fraction of the great bands on these soundtracks. And I wanted to give a special shout out to one of the coolest soundtracks in the series from Tony Hawk's American Wasteland. It's super legit. It's got 7 Seconds, DRI, and Pig Destroyer. It's got Taking Back Sunday covering the Descendants. It's got Thrice covering Minor Threat, and Fall Out Boy covering Gorilla Biscuits. Like, how good of a lineup is that? How many people heard of Gorilla Biscuits for the first time because of this game? The fact of the matter is that these games were responsible for a huge amount of kids getting into punk and hardcore for the first time. They sold tens of millions of copies over the course of the 10 or so years that the series was really hot, and that's just absolutely massive exposure for all the bands on these soundtracks, especially considering that they got 0 radio or MTV airplay. So I don't know who is responsible for putting these soundtracks together, but whoever you are, if you're watching, hats off, my friend. Nice work.
And skate or die in 5 rad events that pit you against a friend or bionic Lester. Remember, I'm never farther than your TV.
Which brings us to part 2, the music games. Along with the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series, we have to talk about Guitar Hero and Rock Band. Those two games were massively important to the rock, metal, and punk genres. You could probably even make a credible case for them actually being even more important than Tony Hawk because they got a whole generation of kids to not just listen to music, but to actually play music. For example, Post Malone. 6 years ago, I started playing guitar because of Guitar Hero. I'm 5-star everything on Expert Mode Guitar Hero 3. My parents don't make music. I was around music, but my parents were never musical. I just wanted to rock out. I taught myself how to play real guitar off YouTube videos, watching people play stuff like AC/DC and Metallica. And I'm not even going to attempt to list every band that was in these games, so please do not tell me like, oh, you forgot this band or that band, because that's not the point. This isn't supposed to be a comprehensive list. You can go on Wikipedia if that's what you want, but a few of the names that stick out to me as the more extreme bands or maybe smaller bands that probably got a boost from these games would be Lamb of God, Avenged Sevenfold, Slipknot, At the Drive-In, Dead Kennedys, In Flames, Bad Brains, Atreyu, Children of Bodom, and Strung Out, among many others. Maybe the coolest example in my book was the DLC stuff like the Ferret Pack for Guitar Hero, which had the Devil Wears Prada, Chimera, and Unearth on it. And again, like the Tony Hawk games, these were a huge deal for the scene because of the just absolutely massive scale that these games penetrated pop culture. The music game thing in the mid-2000s was a full-on mainstream phenomenon that the whole family would get into. Kind of makes me wish I had a video of like a suburban soccer mom rocking out to an Unearth song with her kids. But I think the best example of how much these games could move the needle for bands would be Dragon Force and Fall of Troy. I was in college at the time, and I remember suddenly seeing people in Dragon Force shirts on campus. And then my accounting professor made a Dragon Force joke one day in class. But I was baffled. I was like, what? How the fuck do all these normies know who Dragon Force is of all bands? Because at the time, they were just kind of a random power metal band. And then I realized that, of course, the answer was Guitar Hero, because their song Through the Fire and the Flames was one of the hardest songs in that game, and it kind of became a meme because of that. And the same goes to a lesser extent for Fall of Troy. I'm still kind of blown away to this day by how much of a fan base they still have, considering they were never a particularly big band. And again, I think a huge part of that is because of the exposure they got from Guitar Hero 3.
Cool. Totally hot. Way radical, man. Excellent.
And part 3, the racing games. This category is interesting because it's probably the biggest one in terms of the sheer number of games that have a pretty awesome rock soundtrack. There's literally dozens of them, so again, there's no way that I could even come close to listing all of them. As a few examples, the Need for Speed series, which has bands like Rancid, Story of the Year, Unwritten Law, Snapcase, and Bad Religion. The Burnout series, which has some really strong soundtracks with 18 Visions, Reggie and the Full Effect, Newfound Glory, My Chemical Romance, Midtown, Motion City Soundtrack, Yellowcard, and Finch, among many other bands. And the Motocross vs. ATV series, which had Seosin, My Chemical Romance, Reliant K. And I don't know why, but seeing Seosin of all bands in a motorsports game is really funny to me for some reason. And along the same lines, I saw that NASCAR Thunder has Rancid in it. Like, Rancid and NASCAR is a very interesting combination. And my personal favorite car game, the only one I ever got really into, was Crazy Taxi. And Crazy Taxi, at least the version that I had on Dreamcast, had a soundtrack exclusively by Bad Religion and The Offspring. And like I said, there's a ton more games here, and I just can't mention all of them, but a couple others I wanted to throw out are the Twisted Metal series, Motocross Superfly, Jeremy McGrath's Supercross World, and ATV Off-Road Fury. And speaking of those odd moments like Seosin ending up in a motorsports game, before I go on to the next section, which is sports games, I want to pause for a minute to answer the question that I had going into this, and a question that probably a lot of you guys have too after seeing some of these soundtracks.
Come on. Almost. Finally. Yeah!
Triumph is ours!
Girls!
And that brings us to part 4, how NoFX ends up in a hockey game. So how does this happen? Like, I totally get why Bad Religion or even a rock band like Power Man 5000 ends up in a Tony Hawk game. But how the hell does a band like 18 Visions, Finch, or the Black Dahlia Murder end up in a mainstream sports game like MLB The Show or whatever? I mean, it just seems like such an odd fit, right? So to find out, I asked Josh Grabel from Bullet Tooth, who's also the founder of Trustkill Records. He had several of his bands like 18 Visions and Bullet for My Valentine get placed into games back in the mid-2000s, so I figured he would know, and here's what he told me. Basically, the deal is that the developers or the publishers have a person called the music director, and it's that person's job to make the game's soundtrack happen. They pick the bands and the songs, they negotiate a deal between the band, the label, and the game's publisher, and then they get the final master audio files and hand them off to their team to put them into the game itself. They kind of drive the whole thing from start to finish, just like the A&R would at a label. So as far as how a band like Finch or Motion City Soundtrack would end up in a NASCAR game or whatever, it's mostly because of the music director. Because the music director is a fan, they thought it was a fit for the game's vibe and audience, and then they reached out to the label to make it happen. So if you ever wondered how these kind of weird things came together, now you know.
Serving as our official referee is United States National Video Team Captain Don Nauert.
Part 5, the sports games. Like I alluded to in the previous section, sports games are another one of these genres with weirdly sick rock, metal, and punk soundtrack. And I say weirdly because a lot of the bands on these soundtracks wouldn't be caught dead at a sporting event of any kind, but here they are all over the soundtracks. As far as sports games go, the biggest example is probably the Madden games. Absolutely massive franchise that's sold tens, if not hundreds of millions of copies over its lifetime. And it's had bands like Fall Out Boy, All American Rejects, Hit the Lights, Less Than Jake, and Under Oath on the soundtracks. And another big one is MLB The Show, which has had Alexis on Fire and A Static Lullaby, for example. And I don't know why, but A Static Lullaby as the background for a baseball game is just super funny to me. Or Matchbook Romance as the soundtrack for a football game, but I digress. You also had the FIFA series, the NCAA Football series, and the NHL games. And I'm also not a big sports game guy, so I never really played any of these, but I've heard so many people over the years mention these as the way that they discovered a ton of bands, or even as their gateway to music in general. And like I said earlier, you really can't overestimate how just absolutely massively popular these games are. And because of that, you could actually make a case that these games got more people into bands than Tony Hawk did.
Meanwhile, Jason is coming on strong. He's in the pyramid and dodging Shy Guys, and he descends even deeper in search of Birdo.
And speaking of mainstream games, that brings us to part 6, Call of Duty. I'm breaking this one out on its own because I think it's a super interesting case study of how gaming and rock or metal can overlap in a really authentic way. I talked about this in my Avenged Sevenfold video as well, for anybody who saw that, but as some of you know, they've been a fixture in this series, and all that stems from the fact that Matt from Avenged Sevenfold is a big gamer, and in particular, a really big Call of Duty fan. And so because of that, when they were approached to do something with Black Ops 2, they did something that I think is really cool. Rather than just do the easy thing of licensing a song to use while the opening credits play or whatever, they're actually in the game as an Easter egg. At the end of the game, there's a little skit with them and some of the characters in the game, and then there's a cutscene where they play a song, all done in the in-game engine. Like, they actually make a music video using the game engine. Normally that sort of thing is super cringe and you're like, why did anybody think this was a good idea? But in this case, it came out great. It feels super authentic. It feels really seamless. You can tell they were really stoked to do it, and because of that, it just worked out so well. And from a marketing perspective, I actually think that being in Call of Duty like this is part of what made them transition from being seen as like an emo band, which is how people thought of them when they first came out with Waking the Fallen, to what we think of them now, which is more of like a Five Finger Death Punch, Red State military wife rock kind of band. And just to be clear, I don't mean that in a negative way at all. I love Avenged Sevenfold. I just think it's really interesting how they're able to transition their brand and their fan base like that, and I think this game played a big part of that.
Gotta get Genesis like nothing ever before. Genesis is so much more.
And part 7, the open world games. And last but not least, there's a couple of these games which have some of the coolest soundtracks in all of gaming. First up, the big dog, Grand Theft Auto. As anybody who's followed this developer knows, they've always had their finger just totally on the pulse of pop culture, and their radio stations in these games are a perfect example of that. In Grand Theft Auto 4, there's a radio station called LCHC, like Liberty City Hardcore, which has Cro-Mag, Sick of It All, Agnostic Front, and Leeway, among others. And in Grand Theft Auto 5, they did something super cool, which is they actually got Keith Morris, who's the original singer for Black Flag and the Circle Jerks, to curate a radio station called Channel X. And that radio station has The Germs, F.P.R.E.M.I.X, Black Flag, Agent Orange, and a bunch of other classic punk on it. Just super cool. And the other open world series that needs to be mentioned here, which I actually like better than Grand Theft Auto as a game, is Saints Row. These games also have curated radio stations, which are shockingly well done. They've got some really legit stuff like the Black Dahlia Murder, Miss May I, Between the Buried and Me, Shai Hulud, and After the Burial, among many other super legit bands like that. If the music director responsible for this happens to be watching, well done, my friend. Nice work.
Top Gun, the video game. This is your dream shot.
And that brings us to part 8, the impact that game soundtracks had on the scene. So to wrap things up, I just wanted to really spell out why games are such a big deal for the scene, because I've really never heard anybody talk about it, and I think it's pretty interesting. The first reason is just the sheer scale. These games sold a staggering amount of copies that just dwarfs anything we could even really think of in the music world. For example, the Call of Duty series has sold over 250 million copies over its lifetime. That's honestly probably more than the album sales of every band I mentioned in this video combined, even including huge bands like Fall Out Boy and The Offspring. These games are just that big, and what that means is that they help these bands reach a huge amount of people, way more than the bands or their labels could ever do in really any other way. And second, it was also exposure to a totally new audience. And what I mean by that is, if Epitaph puts out, say, a new Rancid album, then they'll do a great job of marketing it to punk fans, because that's what they're good at, right? But getting Rancid in a NASCAR game, well, that's something that Epitaph is not going to do, but it means exposure to a huge audience that they might otherwise never get in front of. And one big part of that is retail distribution at places like GameStop or Target or Walmart that have thousands and thousands of stores that otherwise a band like the Black Dahlia Murder or Motion City Soundtrack would probably never be in. And finally, immersion. And what I mean by that is that these are games that you play a lot, and these songs are in your ears the whole time. Like, I remember playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater on Dreamcast, which, by the way, was the best version, retrying certain levels over and over and over again, trying to get that new high score, and the whole time these songs are just getting burned into my brain. Like, I fucking hate Power Man 5000, but I know every note of that. This is what it's like when worlds collide. I know every note of that dumb song, even though I hate it. And that is the power of gaming as an experience, and the power that music has when it's coupled with that experience. So just to sum up how important games could be for bands in the scene from like an industry perspective, here's what Josh from Bullet Tooth and Trustkill told me. I would push for a video game placement over just about anything else. The spikes in sales and streaming are much more prevalent than other opportunities that you think may push the needle, like getting your new video spun on MTV or a festival slot or radio spins. So there you have it, straight from the horse's mouth. Looking back at it, I think game soundtracks were actually a really big part of what shaped the scene during that era. It seems like their time may have passed, and I'm probably being delusional, but if it's alright with you, I'm still gonna sit here waiting for the Tony Hawk games to return to glory, along with the soundtracks that were such an important part of them.
Whoa, I'm out of here.
Alright my friends, there's my 2 cents on the world of video game soundtracks. Let me know what you think in the comments. What other soundtracks that I left out? I mean, I can't possibly include all of them, but what are some of the soundtracks that you thought were especially good or especially important that I didn't mention in the video? Let me know in the comments. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the whole licensed music soundtrack is not as big of a deal as it used to be in games. I don't play as many games as I used to, so maybe I'm wrong, but it just kind of seems like that's not as big of a thing as it used to be. Let me know in the comments if that's true or if I'm missing out, or let me know what the deal is there. So yeah, that's about all I have. Again, if you like this video or any of my other videos, I would love it if you give me a follow on Instagram. I'm putting a lot more effort into my content over there, so there's a link to that in the description. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.